The blizzard howls, Jedediah clutching his last piece of meat, starvation gnawing. A lost girl collapses at his cabin door. Live child, let my sacrifice mean something. He gives his only sustenance, prepared to die, but a hidden detail in her gaze promises an unimaginable twist, reshaping the mountain man's solitary fate forever. In a forgotten corner of the Despair Peaks, where civilization was merely a distant mirage and the wind howled songs of solitude, Jedediah lived a life carved from granite and ice. He was a mountain man, a shaggy, towering specter who had rejected the yoke of society to forge an existence in the frigid harshness. Jedediah possessed neither gold nor lands, but he was the silent guardian of an ancient code. Survival was a shared treasure, even if the cost was utter deprivation. That winter, unforgiving and voracious, had sucked the life from the land and withered his provisions, forcing him to subsist on the last crumbs of his store. He knew the taste of true hunger, a constant, dull ache that had become as familiar as the bite of the mountain air. Yet within his rugged frame beat a heart that remembered a time before the ice, a time when promises were made and broken, and a man learned the true value of a single selfless act. His name, Bear, was not merely a descriptor of his imposing frame or his solitary existence, but a quiet echo of a past where he had once roared, then retreated, carrying a wound only the silence of the peaks could attempt to mend. The mountains had demanded everything from him, from the sweat of his brow to the deepest corners of his soul, but they had also offered a stark, brutal clarity, a chance to shed the burden of a world that had betrayed him. He had found a raw, unvarnished truth in the rhythm of the wilderness, a sanctuary from the complexities that had once threatened to consume him whole. He carried the weight of unspoken losses, of a time when he had failed to protect what was most precious, a failure that had driven him to this desolate retreat. This act of ultimate deprivation, this offering, was perhaps the truest fulfillment of his solitary pact with the wild, a final, honorable stand against the cold indifference of fate, a quiet penance for ghosts he carried within. It was in this tableau of desolation that destiny wove its drama. A young woman appeared at the edge of his cabin, barely a trembling shadow against the blizzard that swallowed the horizon. She carried none of the cynicism of the town, only the raw innocence of one utterly lost, a soul adrift by the treacherous luck of those vast expanses. Her clothes were threadbare, her body shivering, and her eyes, though clouded with fear, held a spark of desperate hope. Jedediah, whose rustic soul already knew the bitter taste of true hunger, gazed at her and saw not a stranger, but a reflection of human fragility, a desperate spark in a world of ice. A memory, fleeting and painful, stirred within him, a ghost of a young face he had once sworn to protect, long ago. Without hesitation, he offered her his last precious piece of dried meat, the very last portion that would ensure his own survival. He promised himself that if death found him, it would be under the honorable burden of having allowed another to live, a redemption he had long sought. The young woman accepted the food with the reverence of one receiving a miracle, her silent gratitude and her deep eyes worth more to the mountain man than any worldly wealth. She devoured it quickly, yet with a grace that spoke of deep hunger and deeper humility. Before the first blush of dawn, she was gone, leaving behind only the faint impression of her steps in the snow and the echoing weight of a sacrifice made. The following morning dawned cold and clear, but Jedediah felt not the pangs of fasting, but a strange peace, a quiet resolution settling deep within his bones. His journey was complete. He had given all he had, yet life, or perhaps the enigmatic hand of fate, held grander plans for the solitary hermit, and the selfless gesture he judged to be a final farewell, a parting of ways with a world he thought had nothing left to offer him. The very mountain itself seemed to hold its breath, awaiting a dawn unlike any other. The morning light, thin and cold, painted the world in shades of blue and stark white, a canvas fitting for an ending. Jedediah awoke to the gnawing emptiness in his belly, a familiar companion now, but today it was different. There was no desperate scramble for dwindling provisions, no calculation of days left. only a profound, heavy stillness. He stirred the embers in his hearth, coaxing a meager warmth from the dying fire, each movement deliberate, unhurried, as a man preparing for a long final sleep. The wind hummed a low, mournful tune through the pines, a eulogy for a life lived on the fringes, for a soul that had sought both refuge and penance in the unforgiving embrace of the peaks. His gaze drifted to the small, packed earth floor where the girl had knelt, the faint indentation still visible, a ghost of her fleeting presence. He pictured her face, the wide, fearful eyes, the slow dawning of gratitude as she clutched the dried meat. He had given his life, he believed, but in that giving he had found a peculiar kind of peace, a quiet redemption for a past he could not alter. The ache in his gut was profound, yet it held no terror, only the stoic acceptance of a man who had fulfilled his final solitary vow. He had given all there was to give, and now the mountain would claim its due. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the shifting angles of light through his single window. He mended a broken snowshoe, sharpened an axe blade to a keen edge, each task a mechanical rhythm against the backdrop of his impending fate. His mind, though quiet, was not empty. Fragments of memory drifted like snowflakes, a child's laughter, the scent of fresh-baked bread, the warmth of a hand in his. He had walked away from such things, believing himself unworthy, undeserving of anything but the stark communion with the wild. Now, at the precipice of his own undoing, those memories felt less like torment, and more like a gentle, fading whisper of what could have been. The silence of the cabin was absolute, save for the crackle of the fire and the steady beat of his own heart, a drum slowly slowing its rhythm. Then a sound. At first he dismissed it as the wind playing tricks, a branch laden with snow snapping under its weight. But it came again, distinct, rhythmic, a faint crunching in the distance, growing steadily louder. It was not the light, cautious step of a deer, nor the heavy tread of a bear. It was something else, something with purpose, something that carried a resonance he hadn't heard in years. His senses, honed by decades of solitude, snapped to attention. He moved to the window, peering out through the frost-kissed pane. The swirling snow had lessened, revealing more of the vast, white expanse. Shapes. Multiple shapes emerging from the tree line. At first indistinct against the glare of the snow, then slowly resolving into human forms. Not one, but many. A sudden, jarring shock jolted through him, an electric current of disbelief. His breath hitched in his throat, a forgotten sensation. His carefully constructed peace shattered, replaced by an unfamiliar dread. He counted, though his mind struggled to grasp the reality of what his eyes were seeing. 6 figures, 6 women, moving with a synchronized purpose, following a faint, almost invisible trail in the fresh snow. At their lead, unmistakable even from a distance, was the very girl he had helped, her small frame now resolute guiding the others. The crunch of their boots on the snow grew louder, each step a hammer blow against the walls of his solitude. They carried bundles, not heavy packs of seasoned mountaineers, but modest belongings wrapped in cloth, testament to a journey undertaken out of necessity. Their faces, though distant, seemed etched with a shared determination, a silent resolve that spoke of hardship endured and a common goal. They paused at the edge of his clearing, a collective breath taken before they advanced. The girl pointed to his cabin, and the others nodded, their expressions unreadable from his vantage point, yet radiating an undeniable intensity. Jedediah stood transfixed, his old axe, forgotten in his hand, feeling suddenly heavy, unfamiliar. He had offered his last breath for one. Now 6 stood before his sanctuary, their arrival an impossible, undeniable consequence of his generosity. This was not the quiet death he had prepared for. This was a resurrection he had not sought, a shattering of his self-imposed exile. His heart, which he had believed was slowing to its final beat, surged with a chaotic, overwhelming pulse. The air grew thick with unspoken questions, with the weight of an unforeseen future. His world, forged in solitude and sustained by deprivation, was now irrevocably altered. He watched them, a silent invasion, as they began to cross the clearing, each step bringing them closer to the threshold of his small, lonely life. The 6 figures advanced, their movements deliberate, each step carving a path through the pristine snow towards the silent, unyielding presence of Jedediah's cabin. The air, already thin and cold, seemed to crackle with an unspoken tension, a palpable unease that hung between the solitary man and the unexpected procession. Jedediah remained rooted by the window, a silent sentinel, his gaze fixed upon the group. He watched as the young girl, the one he had met the night before, stepped forward, her smaller frame an anchor for the 5 women who flanked her. They stopped a respectful distance from his door, a silent acknowledgement of the formidable barrier that was his hermitage. The girl's voice, though soft, carried clearly on the crisp air. She spoke of gratitude, of a life saved, and then, her words shifting, she introduced each of the women as her sisters. Their names, spoken with a reverence that hinted at their bond, hung in the air. Ilara, with eyes that held the wisdom of deep forests. Brenna, strong and steady. Maeve, quick-witted and keen. Isolde, quiet and observant. And finally, the youngest, the one Jedediah had helped, named Lyra. Each face was weathered by hardship, but none bore the marks of malicious intent. Instead, he saw a shared resilience, a quiet determination that mirrored his own. Lyra then stepped forward, holding out a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a simple offering. She spoke of a debt, not of gold, but of life, and of a vow they had all made to repay it. She explained their plight, a story of persecution and loss, of being driven from their home by circumstances that echoed the wild injustice Jedediah himself had once sought to escape. They had nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to. Their arrival was not an act of aggression, but a plea, a desperate hope for sanctuary in a world that had offered them none. Jedediah, whose life had been a symphony of solitude, found himself unexpectedly at a crossroads. His cabin, a fortress built against the outside world, was now besieged not by threats, but by a desperate, silent request for succor. He looked from one face to another, searching for deceit, for the cunning that often lurked behind pleas for help. Yet he found only weariness, fear, and a profound, unwavering gratitude. He was a man of the mountains, bound by a code that transcended the petty cruelties of men. He had given his last to one, and now 6 stood before him, the consequences of his own humanity. He knew, with the certainty of the wind shifting before a storm, that his life as he knew it was over. He could turn them away, condemn them to the merciless embrace of the blizzard, but such an act would unravel the very core of the man he had become, would betray the quiet redemption he had found in his sacrifice. The weight of his own principles, the ancient code of the mountain, pressed down upon him. He was a protector, a guardian of the vulnerable, even when that vulnerability intruded upon his carefully constructed solitude. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jedediah broke his silence, his voice a low rumble, weathered like the stones of the peaks themselves. He acknowledged their desperation, the harsh hand of fate that had brought them to his door. He would allow them to stay, he stated, his words measured, carving out the boundaries of his reluctant generosity. But his sanctuary was not a haven of idleness. The mountain demanded effort, constant vigilance, and unwavering contribution from all who dared to seek its shelter. It offered no free passage, no easy comfort, only the stark promise of survival earned through toil. He made it clear, his cabin was not a gift, but a temporary refuge, a place where they could find shelter in exchange for their strength, their skills, and their absolute respect for the arduous ways of the wild. He offered not a welcoming home, but a stark, uncompromising sanctuary in exchange for utility and adherence to the relentless rules of that savage place. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with the implications of his terms, a challenge laid bare in the heart of the snow-covered wilderness. The days that followed Jedediah's reluctant offer were a study in contrasts, a delicate balance between the mountain's harsh demands and the quiet industry of its new inhabitants. The women, true to their word, did not merely seek shelter, they sought to earn it. Each dawn found them rising with the first pale light, their movements purposeful and efficient, a stark testament to lives lived under duress. Jedediah, ever the silent observer, watched as his ordered, solitary world slowly began to shift. Lyra, the youngest, proved herself surprisingly adept at foraging, her small hands nimble as she gathered late-season berries and medicinal roots from beneath the snow, knowledge gleaned from a past life he could only guess at. Ilara, with her quiet wisdom, became the hearthkeeper, her presence radiating a calm warmth that seemed to push back the perpetual chill of the cabin. She tended the fire with an almost reverent care, ensuring a steady heat that made the rough-hewn space feel less like a shelter and more like a fledgling home. Brenna, strong and resolute, mirrored Jedediah's physical labor, helping him fell small trees for firewood and clear snowdrifts from the path. Her determination, a silent challenge to his own endurance. Maeve, sharp-eyed and quick-witted, took on the task of mending and crafting, transforming worn fabrics into surprisingly durable garments, and fashioning simple tools from scavenged materials. Her hands, though delicate, worked with a tireless precision. Isolde, the most reserved, often disappeared for hours, returning with bundles of herbs and dried plants, her knowledge of natural remedies proving invaluable in treating the aches and small injuries that were a constant companion in the harsh mountain environment. The mountain man, accustomed to the raw necessities of survival, found himself observing skills he had not possessed, nor considered vital, slowly weaving themselves into the fabric of his daily life. He saw the changes, subtle at first, then undeniably profound. The scent of pine and smoke, once the cabin's sole perfume, was now layered with the earthy aroma of simmering stews, and the faint, sweet fragrance of herbs drying by the fire. The rough fur pelts that served as blankets were meticulously cleaned and mended, the cabin itself gaining an unexpected air of order and a quiet, domestic hum. Jedediah watched as Ilara, with a soft, almost imperceptible gesture, added a simple, hand-carved wooden spoon to his sparse eating utensils, a small act that brought an unfamiliar lightness to the space. It was not mere survival they were crafting, but a semblance of comfort, a quiet dignity in the face of desolation. His initial skepticism, a shield he had worn for years, began to subtly erode. He had believed their presence would be a burden, a drain on his meager resources. Instead, they brought not only their labor, but an unexpected wealth of ingenuity and a profound sense of shared purpose. The cabin, once a stark refuge, was slowly, almost imperceptibly, being transformed. It was no longer merely a place to endure, but a space imbued with the nascent warmth of belonging. Yet, as the days shortened and the snow piled deeper, a chill wind carried more than just frost. Whispers, faint at first, then growing more insistent, began to drift through the silent woods. Tales of the mountain man's unexpected guests reached the ears of those who dwelled in the distant scattered settlements at the base of the peaks. A reclusive mountain man, now harboring a group of women, was a curiosity, a challenge to the established order of solitude. And among these whispers, a single, ominous name began to emerge. Elias Thorne, a ruthless fur trapper and land prospector, known for his relentless pursuit of what he deemed his. He saw the mountains not as a sanctuary, but as a resource to be plundered, and he had long viewed Jedediah's territory with covetous eyes. Jedediah, the silent guardian of his isolated domain, suddenly found his progress, his newfound and tentative sense of peace brutally interrupted. The mountain man, who had believed his struggles were primarily with the land, now faced a challenge from a new, far more insidious kind of wilderness. The chilling rumors of Elias Thorne were not mere whispers. They were a tightening noose around the fragile peace Jedediah and the sisters had begun to forge. Thorne, a man whose avarice knew no bounds, saw the mountain man's isolated domain not as a sacred sanctuary, but as a resource ripe for exploitation. He coveted the rich fur lines, the untouched timber, and now perhaps the very presence of the women, seeing them as pawns in his relentless pursuit of control. The arrival of Thorne's men, a ragged but ruthless band of trappers, was heralded by a telltale silence from the forest, an unnatural stillness that Jedediah knew intimately. One bitter afternoon, as Alara was tending to the last of their root vegetables stored in the underground cellar, a sudden, piercing cry echoed through the frigid air. Jedediah, who had been chopping wood, froze, his axe held aloft. Brenna and Maeve, who were mending nets, dropped their work, their faces paling. It was Lyra's voice, sharp with terror. They rushed to the cellar entrance to find the small wooden door torn violently from its hinges. Inside, Alara lay slumped against the damp earth, a jagged piece of wood from the broken door pinning her leg, her face contorted in pain and fear. A hasty retreat by Thorne's men, a crude message of intimidation, had turned into a tragic accident. Panic threatened to grip the small group. Alara, usually the calm anchor, was bleeding heavily, her leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Isolde, with her knowledge of herbs, quickly assessed the injury, her face grim. The bone was clearly broken and the laceration deep. Infection in this isolated wilderness was a death sentence. Jedediah, whose experience lay in mending traps and hunting game, felt a cold dread creep into his heart. He knew the limits of his own knowledge. It was Maeve, usually quick with a jest, who stepped forward, her eyes blazing with an uncharacteristic intensity. She had spent her youth in a village known for its textile work and small-scale carpentry, a world away from the mountains, but a world where precision and problem-solving were paramount. While Isolde prepared a poultice, Maeve quickly surveyed the damage. She spoke with a quiet authority, directing Brenna to carefully stabilize Alara's leg, while instructing Lyra to find the straightest, strongest saplings she could. She described with surprising clarity how to fashion splints from the wood and bind them tightly with strips of cloth, her hands already moving to tear apart an old, clean linen shirt. Her knowledge, so unexpected, was a beacon in the desperate moment. Jedediah, watching her work with an almost surgical focus, felt a profound shift. He had judged strength by muscle and resilience by endurance. Yet here was Maeve, her quiet intelligence and forgotten craft now the key to saving a life. She directed him to retrieve specific tools, to heat water, to assist in the delicate process of realigning the bone. He, the formidable mountain man, found himself following her instructions, his rough hands moving with surprising gentleness, guided by her steady voice. The cabin, usually filled with the sounds of daily toil, was hushed, save for Alara's pained gasps and Maeve's soft, urgent directives. As the splints were finally secured and Isolde applied her herbal salves, a tense silence settled. Alara, though still in pain, was stable. The crisis had been averted, not by brute force, but by a quiet, often overlooked wisdom. Later, as the fire crackled and the immediate danger receded, Jedediah found himself looking at the women with new eyes. Their past, once a vague mystery, now felt closer, more tangible. Maeve, exhausted but resolute, confessed that her family had been driven out for refusing to sell their ancestral land to a grasping lord, forced to wander until they found a fleeting peace. Alara, from her cot, spoke of the quiet torment of watching her younger sisters struggle, carrying a silent burden of responsibility that Jedediah now understood. He, in turn, found himself speaking of his own ghosts, of a promise broken and a life lost that had driven him to the solitude of the peaks, a tale he had never shared with another living soul. The shocking truth was not an external threat, but the raw, unvarnished revelation of their mutual vulnerabilities, sealing their unlikely partnership as two sets of outcasts who had found each other, not through blood, but through the crucible of shared hardship and an unexpected act of compassion. The following morning, Alara, though weak, was resting more easily. Thorne's men, however, were not finished. From the distant ridge, through the crisp morning air, came the sound of a single, mocking gunshot, followed by the sight of a plume of smoke rising from a copse of trees bordering Jedediah's land, where they had carefully placed their best deer traps. It was a brutal declaration, a public challenge, a clear message that the skirmish over Alara was but the opening volley in a much larger, far more dangerous battle. The mountain man's sanctuary, once considered invulnerable, was now a battleground. The gunshot that echoed from the ridge was a stark reminder of the world's enduring cruelty, shattering the tentative peace forged in the aftermath of Alara's injury. Yet, the shared vulnerability and the life-saving act had irrevocably altered the dynamic within Jedediah's cabin. The forced intimacy of the crisis had stripped away the layers of reservation, revealing the raw, beating hearts beneath. He had seen their strength, their ingenuity, and their quiet compassion. They, in turn, had witnessed his silent agony over Alara's plight, the deep concern hidden beneath his gruff exterior. The unspoken respect had deepened into something akin to familial trust. In the days that followed, while Alara slowly recovered, a new rhythm settled over the cabin. Jedediah, no longer merely the provider of shelter, found himself an integral part of their intricate tapestry of life. He would watch Lyra, her spirit untamed, sketching images in charcoal by the firelight, her youthful dreams finding expression even in the harsh confines of the mountain. Brenna and Maeve, now working in tandem, continued to fortify the cabin, their shared laughter occasionally breaking the quiet industry, a sound Jedediah found himself growing accustomed to. Isolde, with her steady hand and deep knowledge, would prepare healing broths for Alara, often sharing her knowledge of the mountain's hidden remedies with Jedediah, who listened with a newfound interest. One evening, as a gentle snow fell outside and the fire cast dancing shadows on the walls, Jedediah found Lyra tracing a familiar symbol on a piece of bark, a stylized bear, its head turned, seemingly watchful. It was the same symbol, he realized with a jolt, that was carved onto the old weathered wooden amulet he wore beneath his tunic, an heirloom from his own long-lost family. When he asked her about it, Lyra explained that it was their family's crest, passed down through generations, representing protection and resilience, a connection to the wild places their ancestors had always inhabited. Her family, she explained, had for centuries been guardians of certain sacred mountain passes, a lineage tied to the land itself. Jedediah, stunned, revealed his own amulet, the worn bear almost identical to Lyra's drawing. A silence fell, thick with the weight of generations. His own family, long thought lost to time and tragedy, had also been guardians, their purpose to protect the very passes that ran through these peaks from encroachment. His ancestors and theirs had been bound to this land, protecting its solitude and its resources, long before the modern world had begun its insatiable reach. Their paths, it seemed, had been intertwined by fate and ancestry, long before the first snowflake of this fateful winter. This ancient connection, a revelation from the mists of time, solidified their bond, giving their unlikely family a sense of predestination, a shared heritage that ran deeper than the snow. The days warmed, hinting at the reluctant approach of spring, bringing with it a fleeting sense of security. The immediate threat from Thorn seemed to have receded, perhaps deterred by the growing rumors of the mountain man's strange new company. The air, though still crisp, carried the scent of thawing earth and the promise of new growth. They gathered around the fire each evening, sharing stories, laughter, and the quiet comfort of their shared existence. For the first time in decades, Jedediah felt the unfamiliar, yet profoundly comforting sensation of belonging. His solitary heart, once a frozen landscape, now thrummed with the warmth of connection. The mountain man, who had sought only isolation, found himself at the heart of a found family, bound by something far stronger than blood. But the peace was a fragile thing, a delicate bloom in a harsh environment. One twilight, as Jedediah stood by the cabin door scanning the horizon, he noticed an unfamiliar disturbance. Not the usual tracks of deer or snowshoe hare, but a series of broken branches, freshly snapped, forming an almost imperceptible trail leading away from their water source. And embedded in the snow by the creek, a small, crudely fashioned wooden figure, a grotesque caricature of a bear with a dagger plunged into its heart. It was a clear, chilling message, a brutal declaration. Thorn was not gone. He had merely been biding his time, marking their every move, waiting for the opportune moment. The newly discovered calm, the nascent hope, was abruptly shattered. The mountain, which had offered sanctuary, was about to become a battleground once more, and this time, the stakes were far higher than mere survival. The crude wooden effigy, a macabre message left by the creek, was a chilling declaration. Thorn had not retreated. He had merely coiled, waiting. The fleeting calm was shattered, replaced by a pervasive sense of dread that settled over the cabin. Jedediah knew that this was not merely a threat against his territory. It was a direct challenge to the sanctuary he now shared, a deliberate assault on the fragile new life they had all forged. His heart, which had softened with the warmth of companionship, now hardened with a fierce protective resolve. He was no longer just protecting his solitude. He was defending his newfound family. Thorn's motives, once shrouded in vague ambition, now became frighteningly clear. His scouts, ranging deeper than before, had observed the unexpected transformation of Jedediah's isolated cabin. The presence of 6 women, capable and resilient, represented not a burden, but a prize. They were perceived as property to be claimed, a workforce to be exploited, and a means to solidify Thorn's dominance over the region. He saw Jedediah's act of kindness not as altruism, but as a weakness to be exploited, a gateway into a territory he long coveted. The attacks began subtly, then escalated with brutal efficiency. First, their carefully placed traps were sprung, the game stolen, their hunting grounds systematically depleted. Then, a small, but vital, cache of preserved food was discovered vandalized, its contents ruined. The objective was clear: to starve them out, to drive them from their mountain home, or to force a confrontation on Thorn's terms. Each act was a calculated move, designed to erode their resolve, to chip away at their resources and their hope. The sisters, though resilient, felt the tightening grip of fear. Ilara, still recovering, grew weaker with the dwindling supplies. Lyra's usually bright spirit dimmed, her sketches now reflecting the shadows that gathered around them. One frigid afternoon, a scout, a hardened man named Silas, who had once traded furs with Jedediah in quieter times, appeared at the edge of the clearing. His face was grim, his eyes betraying a reluctant sympathy. He carried a message, not of violence but of insidious intent. Thorn, he relayed, would offer them safe passage out of the mountains, an escorted journey back to the nearest settlement on one condition. The sisters were to be handed over. They would, Silas explained, be taken to Thorn's camp where they would find work and be provided for. The unspoken implication hung heavy in the air, a chilling promise of servitude and worse. Jedediah, listening to Silas, felt a cold fury, a primal urge to protect that surpassed anything he had known. Thorn viewed them not as people, but as commodities. But the scout also revealed a darker truth. Thorn was not working alone. He had formed a loose alliance with a small, desperate band of timber prospectors who had recently ventured into the foothills, driven by rumors of untouched old-growth forests further up the peaks. These prospectors, hungry for new territory, were wary of Jedediah's long-standing claim. Thorn, with his promises of easy access and shared spoils, had turned their ambition into a weapon, using them to surround and pressure Jedediah's sanctuary from multiple sides. The threat was not a single entity, but a hydra, its heads extending in different directions, all converging on their mountain home. As Jedediah absorbed this grim news, Ilara, who had heard parts of the conversation from her cot, spoke, her voice weak but clear. She offered herself, a desperate, heartbreaking proposal. She would go with Silas, allow herself to be taken to Thorn. Perhaps, she reasoned, her presence alone would satisfy his greed, providing a distraction, buying her family time to escape, to seek true safety in the deeper, more remote passes that only Jedediah truly knew. It was an act of profound self-sacrifice, born of a fierce love for her sisters and a desperate hope to protect them from a fate she had already endured. The mountain man, his heart torn by her offer, knew the choice was hers alone. But the weight of it, the terrible beauty of her sacrifice, settled upon him like a shroud of snow, bringing with it the chilling realization that to save his new family, he would have to face the true wilderness of man's depravity. Ilara's offer of sacrifice hung heavy in the cabin, a stark testament to the depth of her love and the desperation of their plight. But Jedediah, his heart a storm of conflicting emotions, refused to accept it. To allow her to walk into Thorn's camp was to surrender the very principles that bound him to this new family. He would not trade one life for the uncertain salvation of others. His resolve solidified. They would face Thorn together, on their terms, on their ground. The mountain, his oldest ally, would be their battleground. The confrontation was swift in coming. Thorn, enraged by Jedediah's defiance and Ilara's refusal, assembled his forces. Not just his trappers, but the timber prospectors. Their greed, stoked by promises of untouched forest, now formed a formidable, if disorganized, line. They advanced through the snow-laden pines, a dark tide against the white landscape, their crude weapons glinting in the pale winter sun. Jedediah, positioned strategically with the sisters, had spent the night preparing. He knew every crevice, every hidden path, every treacherous snowdrift on his land. The sisters, though fearful, stood resolute. Brenna, with her quiet strength, manned a prepared rockslide, ready to unleash a cascade of stones onto any who dared to advance on their flank. Maeve, cunning and agile, had rigged a series of tripwires and deadfalls disguised by fresh snow, turning their familiar clearing into a deadly maze. Isolde, with her knowledge of the land, had placed pungent herbs in small, hidden fires, creating smoke that would drift through the trees, disorienting and obscuring the attacker's vision. Lyra, the youngest, was entrusted with the critical task of maintaining communication, her small, swift figure moving between the hidden positions, carrying messages and warnings. Thorn's men, overconfident and underestimating their opponents, charged with a roar. They crashed into Maeve's traps, sending several tumbling into concealed snow pits, their shouts replaced by cries of pain and frustration. Brenna, with a primal yell, released her rockslide, sending a thunderous roar through the valley, scattering a portion of Thorn's men and creating a formidable barrier. The thick, acrid smoke from Isolde's fires billowed through the trees, turning the assault into a chaotic scramble, voices muffled, figures appearing and disappearing like ghosts. Jedediah, a silent, powerful force, moved through the trees like a phantom. He did not seek to kill, but to disable, to disarm, to instill fear. His old axe, wielded with practiced precision, found the flat of a shoulder, the shaft of a rifle, sending men sprawling into the snow, their weapons lost. He fought with the ferocity of a bear protecting its cubs, his every move a testament to decades of survival in the wild. The tide of the battle began to turn. Thorn's forces, disorganized and surprised by the mountain's cunning defenses, lost their momentum. It was then that a new element entered the fray. From the distant slopes, a small band of mountain dwellers, men and women Jedediah had quietly helped in lean years, appeared. Hunters, trappers, and hermits, they were men of the peaks, drawn by the sounds of battle and an old debt. They knew Thorn's reputation for avarice, and they understood the unspoken code of the mountains. They joined the fight, not with shouts of war, but with the quiet, deadly efficiency of those who knew how to move and fight in the wilderness, turning the tide decisively. Thorn, witnessing his forces crumble, raged, screaming orders that went unheeded. He charged Jedediah, a wild, desperate fury in his eyes, brandishing a hunting knife. But Jedediah met him with a different kind of strength. He parried Thorn's desperate thrusts, not with brute force, but with a fluid, defensive grace, using the man's own aggression against him. With a swift, practiced movement, Jedediah disarmed him, sending the knife spinning into the snow. He then pinned Thorn to the ground, not with violence, but with the sheer weight of his presence, his eyes burning with an ancient authority. "This is not your land, Thorn," Jedediah rumbled, his voice low, resonating with the power of the peaks. "It is the mountains, and it has chosen its guardians." Thorn, defeated and humiliated, was released, his spirit broken, his ambition shattered. The timber prospectors, seeing their alliance with Thorn evaporate, swiftly retreated, their dreams of easy riches replaced by the cold reality of the mountain's wrath. Thorn, disgraced and disarmed, was banished, left to walk a treacherous path out of the mountains. A solitary figure now, his empire of greed crumbled. The immediate threat was vanquished, the mountain's sovereignty reaffirmed. Yet, as the last of Thorn's men vanished over the horizon, Jedediah knew the wilderness, both natural and human, remained a dangerous place. The victory was profound, but the scars of the conflict and the memory of the darkness it brought would linger, a stark reminder that peace, like all precious things, was hard-won and fragile. A year passed, bringing with it the full cycle of the mountain's seasons, each one witnessing the steady, vibrant growth of the life Jedediah and the sisters had cultivated. The scars of Thorn's conflict faded, replaced by the resilience of new growth and the deepening roots of their unconventional family. The cabin, once a solitary bastion, now hummed with a constant, comforting rhythm of shared life. The fear that had once clung to them like winter frost had melted away, revealing a profound sense of security and belonging. Jedediah, no longer the solitary bear of the peaks, found his days filled with a richness he had never dared to imagine. He still walked the high trails, checked his traps, and harvested the mountain's bounty, but now he often did so with Brenna by his side, her quiet strength a perfect counterpoint to his own. Maeve and Lyra continued to expand their crafting, their wares finding their way to the scattered mountain communities, forging new, respectful connections. Isolde's knowledge of herbs had turned a small patch of earth behind the cabin into a thriving medicinal garden, tended with meticulous care. And Ilara, fully recovered, had taken on the role of quiet matriarch, her wisdom and warmth the steady pulse of their home. The deepest transformation, however, was etched into Jedediah's own heart. The mountain man, who had believed his destiny was one of stark solitude, was now surrounded by love and purpose. His quiet moments by the fire were no longer meditations on loss, but observations of shared joy. Lyra's laughter echoing through the cabin, Maeve's focused hum as she wove, Ilara's gentle hand on his arm as she passed. The cabin, once merely a shelter, was now unmistakably a home, filled with the aroma of home-cooked meals, the warmth of the hearth, and the steady beat of many hearts intertwined. And in that quiet, contented existence came the most profound symbol of their healing and their future. One crisp autumn morning, as the leaves turned to fire and gold on the peaks, Ilara presented Jedediah with a truth that brought tears to his weathered eyes. He was visibly with child, her belly a gentle curve beneath her homespun dress. The news settled over them like a benediction, a symbol of absolute, complete redemption. The child, their child, would be born of the mountain's harsh beauty and their shared resilience, a testament to the strength found in kindness and the family forged in adversity. A final, deeply resonant truth emerged from the quiet peace of their new life. Among the ancestral relics Lyra and Ilara had carefully preserved lay an ancient worn journal, its pages filled with faded script. It chronicled not only their family's lineage as mountain guardians, but spoke of a prophecy, a legend of a solitary bear man who, through an ultimate act of selflessness, would unite the scattered mountain families and bring lasting peace to the passes. Jedediah's ancestors, it revealed, had once been the very family to whom their own had sworn fealty, their combined purpose to protect the heart of the mountains. His act of giving his last food had not just saved lives, it had fulfilled an ancient prophecy, knitting together two broken lineages, creating a bond that would echo through generations, solidifying their collective guardianship of these sacred peaks. The mountain, a silent witness to countless winters and untold stories, had finally found its voice through Jedediah and his found family. They stood as living proof that true strength was not found in solitude, but in the courage to connect, to protect, and to open one's heart to the unexpected rhythms of life. The home was not merely a structure of wood and stone, but a feeling, a deep sense of belonging that blossomed from the harsh wilderness, a testament to the enduring power of unconditional love. For the mountain man who had once sacrificed his very survival for a stranger had been granted the greatest treasure of all, a family, a legacy, and a home that resonated with the quiet, powerful heartbeat of redemption. Did you enjoy this journey? Tell us from what corner of the world you're watching this story from. Leave your comment, and to make sure you don't miss the next adventure, subscribe to the channel.